He changed the world without firing a single bullet. He brought a colonial empire to its knees through fasting and walking. For 100 years, we thought we knew who Mahatma Gandhi was. Then geneticists and genealogists began looking at the biological record. What they found beneath the mythology is a story of migration, caste, blood, and deep Asian history that nobody expected. Before we dive in, please comment where in the world you are watching from, and do not forget to click subscribe. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born on October 2, 1869, in Porbandar, a small coastal city in what is now the state of Gujarat in western India. That much is certain. His father was Karamchand Gandhi, the Dewan, the chief minister of Porbandar. His mother was Putlibai Gandhi, a deeply devout woman whose religious observance shaped her son's earliest understanding of what it meant to live ethically in the world. The family surname Gandhi means greengrocer or spice merchant in Gujarati, and it traces the family to the Modh Baniya subcaste, a trading community that sat within the broader Vaishya Varna, the merchant class of the Hindu caste hierarchy. For generations, this has been the official story of Gandhi's origins. A Gujarati merchant family, deeply rooted in the coastal trading culture of the Kathiawar Peninsula, producing a son who would become the conscience of the 20th century. But ancestry, as modern genetics has shown repeatedly, is almost never as simple as the story a community tells about itself. The Modh Baniya community, like virtually every human population on Earth, carries in its DNA a history that extends far beyond what any family record or caste tradition can capture. When researchers began examining the genetic profile of Gandhi's ancestral community, and when genealogists began tracing the documentary record of his family line back beyond what was commonly known, they found layers of history that complicate, enrich, and ultimately deepen the understanding of who Gandhi was at the biological level. To understand what DNA reveals about Gandhi's ancestry, you first have to understand what DNA can and cannot tell you about a person's origins. Modern population genetics works by analyzing specific markers in human DNA sequences that vary in predictable ways between populations and that accumulate distinctive patterns over thousands of years of relatively isolated reproduction. These markers allow geneticists to trace where a person's ancestors lived, roughly when those ancestors migrated, and what other populations they mixed with along the way. This science is powerful, but not infinitely precise. When researchers talk about the genetic ancestry of a population like the Modh Baniya community of Gujarat, they are describing statistical patterns across many individuals, not definitive statements about any single person's ancestry. Gandhi himself has never had his DNA directly analyzed in a published scientific study. What we know about his genetic heritage comes from population-level analysis of his ancestral community, from genealogical research into his family line, and from the broader genetic history of the subcontinent that modern research has reconstructed in remarkable detail. With those caveats clearly stated, what the science shows is extraordinary. The Modh Baniya community and the Vaishya trading castes of Gujarat more broadly carry a genetic signature that tells a story of origin and migration stretching back thousands of years, connecting the man who marched to the sea for salt to ancient populations whose movements shaped the entire demographic history of Asia. The Indian subcontinent has one of the most complex population histories on Earth. Modern genetic research, particularly landmark studies conducted by researchers at the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in Hyderabad, the Broad Institute at Harvard and MIT, and numerous Indian and international universities over the past 2 decades, has established that virtually all present-day Indians are descended from 2 ancient ancestral populations. The first is the group researchers call Ancestral North Indians, ANI. This population was genetically close to populations of the ancient Near East, the Caucasus, and Europe. The second is the group called Ancestral South Indians, ASI. This population was more distantly related to Eurasian populations and represents a lineage that had been on the subcontinent for much longer, possibly tens of thousands of years. The proportions of ANI and ASI ancestry vary significantly across Indian populations. Generally, populations in northern and northwestern India carry higher proportions of ANI ancestry, while populations in southern India carry higher proportions of ASI ancestry. Trading castes in Gujarat, including the Maud Bania community of Gandhi's family, tend to carry ANI proportions that are among the highest in the subcontinent, reflecting both their geographic position in the northwest and the social dynamics of caste endogamy that have preserved distinctive genetic patterns for thousands of years. But the ancestral North Indian ancestry, or ANI, itself tells a further story. The ancient North Indian genetic signature is not a single source. It is a mixture assembled over thousands of years from at least 3 distinct ancient populations whose movements through the ancient world have been painstakingly reconstructed through analysis of ancient DNA recovered from archaeological sites across Eurasia. The first component of the ANI ancestry found in populations like Gandhi's ancestral community traces to the ancient hunter-gatherers of the Iranian plateau. These people lived in the highlands of what is now Iran, Iraq, and the surrounding regions, roughly 10,000 to 15,000 years ago. They were among the first Homo sapiens populations to shift from hunting and gathering toward agricultural settlement. As agriculture spread out of the Fertile Crescent, so did these people, or at least their genes. A substantial portion of the genetic ancestry of South Asian populations, including the merchant trading castes of Gujarat, traces to this ancient Iranian farmer population. The second component traces even further back. The Indus Valley Civilization, one of the world's first urban cultures, flourished in the region that is now Pakistan and northwestern India from roughly 3,300 BCE to 1300 BCE. These people built sophisticated cities with planned street grids, advanced drainage systems, and a script that has never been deciphered. What happened to them is one of archaeology's enduring mysteries. The genetic evidence suggests that their descendants did not disappear. They were absorbed into the populations that followed them, contributing a component of ancestry that is found across South Asian populations today and in elevated proportions in exactly the communities of northwestern India and Pakistan where the Indus Valley cities once stood. The third and most consequential component for understanding Gandhi's ancestry is the one that has generated the most scholarly attention and the most public fascination. It is the contribution of the steppe pastoralists. Between roughly 3000 BCE and 1500 BCE, populations of herders living on the vast grassland steppe of what is now Ukraine, Russia, and Kazakhstan underwent a dramatic expansion. These people, associated with the Yamnaya culture and its successor cultures, were mobile, aggressive, and extraordinarily successful. They domesticated the horse. They developed wheeled vehicles. They spoke an early form of what would become the Proto-Indo-European language family, the ancestor of most European languages, Persian, and Sanskrit. The steppe pastoralists moved in multiple directions at once. One branch moved west into Europe, contributing massively to the genetic makeup of present-day Europeans. Another branch moved east and south into Central Asia and then into the Indian subcontinent. This eastern branch, associated with the Sin-Tashta and Andronovo cultures, brought their language, their horses, their ritual practices, and their genes. The genetic impact of this migration on the Indian subcontinent was enormous. Steppe ancestry is found in elevated proportions in upper caste populations across northern India, reflecting the social dynamics that followed when these mobile herding peoples arrived and established themselves in the existing social hierarchy. The Vaishya merchant castes, including the Maud Bania community, carry a step ancestry component that places them solidly within this Indo-Aryan heritage. This means that when you trace Gandhi's ancestral genetic profile through his community's documented ancestry, you are tracing a line that runs from the salt flats of Porbandar back through the merchant culture of medieval Gujarat, back through the ancient trading networks of the Indus Valley, and ultimately back to the windswept grasslands of the Eurasian steppe thousands of years before the Common Era. The man who led the Salt March was himself, at a cellular level, a descendant of people whose entire economy was built around the movement of animals and goods across open landscapes. The steppe ancestry component tells us about Gandhi's paternal line in broad terms, but maternal ancestry, traced through mitochondrial DNA, tells a different and in some ways more intimate story. Mitochondrial DNA is passed unchanged from mother to child across generations, making it possible to trace the direct maternal line indefinitely backward in time. The Modh Bania community's mitochondrial DNA profile is a complex mixture that reflects the community's long history in Gujarat. It includes lineages that are ancient to the subcontinent, haplogroups that were present in the region long before any of the migrations described above. It includes lineages that trace to the ancient Iranian farmers. And it includes a particularly interesting set of lineages that connect to populations of the broader Asian world in ways that speak to Gujarat's centuries-long history as a maritime trading hub. Gujarat's coast faces the Arabian Sea. For thousands of years, Gujarati merchants sailed to Arabia, to East Africa, to the Persian Gulf, and across the Indian Ocean to Southeast Asia. The Modh Bania community participated in this trading world. The DNA of communities like Gandhi's ancestral group carries traces of this maritime connectivity, genetic contributions from the populations of the Western Indian Ocean world that arrived through the trading networks, rather than through any large-scale migration. This is the genetic signature of a community that has always been in motion, always connected to the wider world through commerce. And it is the heritage that Gandhi carried without knowing its specific details. A biological record of ancestors who built their lives on trade, movement, and connection across the boundaries that separated other communities. Beyond the population-level genetics, genealogical research into Gandhi's specific family line has uncovered historical details that add texture to the broad picture that DNA provides. The Gandhi family's documented history in Porbandar goes back several generations before Mohandas' birth, but the family's deeper roots in the Modh Bania community connect them to a trading diaspora that was spread across the Kathiawar Peninsula and beyond. The Modh Bania community takes its name from Modhera, a town in northern Gujarat, famous for its 11th century Sun Temple, one of the architectural masterpieces of medieval India. The community's tradition holds that its members were originally associated with that town and with the trading networks that the temple complex and its surrounding settlement supported. Whether or not the historical details of that founding tradition are accurate in all particulars, the genetic and documentary evidence both support the conclusion that this is an old community with deep roots in Gujarat's merchant culture. Gandhi's maternal ancestry through his mother, Putlabai, is less extensively documented than his paternal line, but what is known points to similar social origins within the Vaishya trading community. Putlabai was known for her extreme religious devotion and her practice of the Pranami faith, a syncretic religious tradition that blends elements of Hinduism and Islam, and that has its deepest roots in the Kathiawar region. The Pranami tradition's emphasis on devotion over ritual, on ethical conduct over caste performance, and on the universality of the divine deeply shaped Gandhi's religious outlook. It also reflects the cosmopolitan trading world from which his maternal family came, a world where contact with multiple religious traditions was a normal feature of commercial life. The genetic story of the Indian subcontinent includes one element that is both scientifically well established and deeply politically sensitive: the role of caste endogamy in preserving population-level genetic differences that have accumulated over thousands of years. Modern genetic research has shown that many Indian caste groups practice sufficiently strict endogamy for long enough periods that they carry genetic signatures almost as distinctive as those of populations on different continents. One study in the American Journal of Human Genetics found patterns of genetic relatedness consistent with thousands of years of endogamous marriage, producing what geneticists call a high levels of identity by descent. That means members of the same caste community are significantly more genetically similar to each other than random sampling of a larger population would produce. The Modh Bania community is part of this broader pattern. The community's genetic profile has been shaped by centuries of marriage primarily within the group, preserving the distinctive combination of ancestral components that reflects its particular history. Gandhi's genetic heritage is, in significant part, a heritage shaped by this social institution that he himself spent much of his life criticizing and working to dismantle. This is one of the more striking ironies that the genetic history reveals. The man who fought against caste discrimination, who took the radical step of adopting an untouchable family in his ashram, who wrote extensively about the injustice of treating human beings differently on the basis of birth, was himself the beneficiary, in a biological sense, of the very system he opposed. The genetic distinctiveness of his community, the preservation of its ancestral heritage, was a product of the endogamous social practices that he argued should be ended. Ultimately, the genetic story does not explain his moral choices, but it enriches our understanding of Gandhi as a product of millennia of migrations, trade, and cultural exchange that helped shape the world he led. The question of what Gandhi's ancestry reveals about the deeper Asian roots of the Indian population connects to one of the most important scientific revisions of the past decade. For most of the 20th century, the dominant model of South Asian population history was relatively simple. The ancient populations of the subcontinent had been joined sometime in the second millennium BCE by Indo-Aryan-speaking migrants from the northwest. These migrants mixed with the existing population, creating the complex mosaic of Indian society. Modern ancient DNA research has shown that this simple model was correct in broad outline, but dramatically underestimated the complexity of what actually happened. The genetic record shows not one major migration, but a series of them, stretching across thousands of years, from multiple directions, involving populations as geographically diverse as the hunter-gatherers of the Iranian plateau, the farmers of the Fertile Crescent, the herders of the Eurasian steppe, and the ancient inhabitants of the subcontinent who had been there for tens of thousands of years. When you look at Gandhi's ancestral community against the backdrop of this revised understanding, what you see is not a simple story of a Gujarat merchant family. You see a living record of Asian demographic history. The DNA of the Modh Bania community is a palimpsest, a document written and overwritten across thousands of years, each layer representing a migration, a contact, a mixing of peoples that left its mark in the genomes of subsequent generations. The steppe herders who contributed to Gandhi's ancestral heritage spoke the language that became Sanskrit. Their arrival in the subcontinent was a foundational event in the cultural history that eventually produced Hinduism, the Vedic literature, and the philosophical traditions that shaped Gandhi's own thought. In a sense, the DNA and the culture are telling the same story. The man who drew on the Bhagavad Gita as his primary ethical inspiration was himself a genetic heir of the people whose migrating descendants brought that tradition to the subcontinent. What does all of this genetic history mean for how we understand Gandhi as a historical figure? It does not change what he did. It does not alter the Salt March, the fast unto death, the assassination on January 30th, 1948, but it does add a dimension to the understanding of who he was that the biographical record alone cannot provide. Gandhi spent his life arguing against the significance of birth, ancestry, and inherited identity. He argued that a person's worth was determined by their conduct, their ethics, their relationship to truth and nonviolence, not by the family or community into which they were born. The irony is that his own birth, the particular community and family line that produced him, gave him access to resources, education, and social position that made his life's work possible. He could go to London to study law because his family had the means. He could command attention in South Africa and India because he carried the social capital of a respectable caste community. The genetic story does not resolve this irony, but it deepens it. What the DNA of Gandhi's ancestral community shows is that the distinctions of caste and community that structured Indian society, and that Gandhi simultaneously benefited from and opposed, were themselves built on biological foundations that stretched back far beyond any human institution. The Madhbaniya community's genetic distinctiveness was not created by caste rules. The caste rules preserved a distinctiveness that was already there, accumulated through thousands of years of population history that predated the social institutions that later codified it. The final piece of the genetic story is perhaps the most resonant. Among the populations most closely related to Gandhi's ancestral community at the genetic level are the trading diaspora communities of the Indian Ocean world, the Ismaili Muslim traders of East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, the Parsi community of Bombay, descendants of Zoroastrian refugees from Iran who had been in Gujarat since the 8th century Common Era, the Lohana and Bhatia trading communities of Sindh and Kutch, and further afield, through the shared steppe ancestry, connections to populations across Central Asia, Iran, and ultimately to the peoples of the Caucasus and Eastern Europe. Gandhi lived and worked in South Africa for 21 years. He organized and advocated on behalf of the Indian community there, most of whom were from South Indian laboring communities rather than Gujarati trading families. The trading diaspora connections that his ancestry represents were also present in that South African context. In the Gujarati Muslim merchants, who were among the first Indians to arrive in Natal and Transvaal. The global connections encoded in Gandhi's DNA, the network of ancestral relationships that linked his community to populations across the Indian Ocean world, and ultimately across Asia and into Europe, mirror in some ways the global significance that his life's work would eventually achieve. He was, by ancestry, the product of a trading people, a community whose biological history was one of movement, connection, and contact across the boundaries of language, religion, and geography. And he became, by choice and action, a figure whose influence crossed exactly those same boundaries. The DNA does not explain Gandhi. No scientific analysis of ancestry can account for the choices that make a life meaningful, but it places him in a story that is older and larger and more deeply connected to the full sweep of Asian and human history than the standard biographical account suggests. The man who chose nonviolence was descended from steppe warriors. The man who opposed caste was preserved by caste endogamy. The man who became a symbol of Indian nationalism carried in his cells the genetic heritage of migrations that preceded India, preceded Hinduism, preceded the very concept of the nation he gave his life to create. That is not a contradiction. It is the kind of complexity that only the full record, documentary, and biological together can reveal. And that is Gandhi's ancestry, a Gujarati merchant family on the surface, and beneath that, layers of deep Asian history stretching from the Eurasian steppe to the Indus Valley to the ancient Iranian plateau. The man who fought for Indian independence carried a genome shaped by migrations that happened thousands of years before India existed. The DNA does not explain the greatness. It does explain the depth. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.